Well, what a double in the desert that was. The first two rounds of the 2022 Formula One season have been and gone, and finally we have some understanding of the competitive order of the grid. Teams to look like they've come out on top are certainly Ferrari and Red Bull, but also any teams running the Ferrari powertrain seem to have had a nice boost in performance over the winter. That can be contributed down to a development in the Ferrari engine package that has obviously not only benefited the main team, but also the other teams, Alfa Romeo and Haas, also running those engines. It's not a surprise that with an aero regulation change, Red Bull have seemingly come out on top, or at least as one of the top cars now on the grid. Adrian Newey is well renowned for his aero packages and aero designing, coming up with clever and insightful ways to utilize airflow to get the best performance out of the car. It's certainly looking like it's going to be a tight battle between the Ferraris and the Red Bulls throughout the season. Most interestingly, it's Mercedes who look like they've taken the biggest step back. And not only is that affecting the works team, but also the other teams running their engine package. Now, I don't think that the Mercedes engine package has got worse. It may just be that Honda and Ferrari and Renault have managed to make great gains over the winter, where Mercedes have only made good gains. It's going to be interesting to watch Mercedes this year because they are a team who are very used to winning, very used to being at the front of the grid, and very used to defending their position rather than challenging for it. Hamilton got a very lucky third place finish, giving Mercedes their first podium of the season in Bahrain when both Red Bulls were unable to finish due to technical issues that took them out of the race. As we then saw in Saudi Arabia, the performance isn't there in comparison to the teams at the front, and we definitely have a clear 1-2 team at the moment that are leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the field. As we've seen in years gone by with Mercedes and last year with Mercedes and Red Bull, it does seem to be that the teams have really got a couple of races until Ferrari and Red Bull, Ferrari now with a 40-point lead in constructors, are too far ahead to really take on a challenge from anyone further behind, and Mercedes could find themselves in a third place fight. I've always spoken about testing being a kind of contributor to what the competitive order will be. Things I look at are reliability, smoothness of driving, complaints from the drivers, legitimate complaints from the drivers whilst going testing. Lap times aren't something that interests me during testing because you just don't know who's going for the fast lap, who's on a light fuel run, who's on a heavy fuel run, who's doing aero tests, who's doing engine tests or whatever else tests they do. So lap times aren't really anything reliable to go on. But of course, pre-season testing did give us a little look at what we thought the competitive order could be, with Ferrari and Red Bull looking like the ones to watch. A smoke out of nowhere car, however, has been the Haas car, specifically in the hands of, back on the grid now, Kevin Magnussen, who has managed to take that car to 2 Q3 performances in the first 2 races of the season and scored points in both of those races. Had there been a couple more cars fall out the front, he may have also found himself on the podium. It's a fantastic step forwards for Haas, and something the team, after spending 2 years being back of the grid, are really going to be excited about. Importantly now, Mick Schumacher has a teammate who not only understands the car, is very skilled at the car, and has a lot of experience in racing. So he can have a lot to learn from Magnussen, and I think Schumacher really should be focusing on that. But now he doesn't have the car to lean back on. He doesn't have the car to blame for bad performances. And although the Saudi Arabian crash was horrific, and we will talk about that later, Schumacher really is going to have to start putting in Q3 performances in qualifying and finishing in the points in the race if he wants to be seen as not just a name in this sport. So let's now talk about the Bahrain Grand Prix, our season opener. We went into the race thinking that Ferrari and Red Bull were the cars to watch, and that was indeed proved correct, when both cars were fighting hard tooth and nail throughout practice and qualifying. Mercedes were on the back foot, but still managed to look like they're the third fastest car on the grid, with not too much threat from behind, but certainly not enough to threat the front. McLaren seemed to be suffering badly with overheating issues, specifically at Bahrain for the brakes, which had impeded their pre-season testing as well at the Bahrain International Circuit. It's certainly an issue the team have got to get on top of. I think once they have got on top of those overheating issues, they will be a force to be reckoned with, and Mercedes will have to look out for them. But until they do, I think Mercedes is fairly safe as the third team on the grid, and McLaren have currently got a lot of work to make up for the first 2 races of the season. As mentioned, Ferrari running teams, Alfa Romeo and Haas are doing incredibly well at the start of the season, and Bahrain was a good testament of that. A little bit of a shaky start for Zhou Guanyu at the start of the season here, as he's come into Formula One, learning the new ropes, understanding the new car a little bit better, and being in a competitive field in this nature. He's used to Formula 2 where all of the cars are the same and really it's talent that leads the way. Whereas in Formula 1, there are so many other factors. So you could be the best driver on the grid, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've got the best car on the grid, and so you might not be winning races straight away. I don't think that anyone believed Guan Yu would be winning races at the start of the season, but it's definitely been a little bit of a steep learning curve for him. I do expect over the next few races for him to get into the groove of Formula 1 a bit more, settle down, and we should start to see some really strong performances from him if his Formula 2 performances are anything to go by. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix gave us the best insight into how the new aero regulations are working in terms of letting cars race behind each other. And I like to say I was wrong in saying that these regulations would do nothing for racing. I was incorrect. They have done so much for racing. They've made it possible for teams to race behind each other lap after lap after lap without feeling too much degradation. They have left the opportunity for switchbacks under DRS detection zones. Now, I believe that was more of a Saudi specific exploitation, if you will, in the fact that if you let a driver pass at one DRS point, you can get them back on the next because you pick up the DRS from behind them so long as you can stay close. I'm not sure that's something we'll see at every race, and I do think that was partially what contributed to the exciting finish of the race we had. But it's good to see these regulations are doing something. It's good to see they've helped shake up the grid a little bit as well. One thing I do want to say about the new regulations, it is still bizarre to me to see the Mercedes with no side pods. They definitely had side pods at the beginning of the year for pre-season testing. They're now gone, and I'm wondering what advantage that actually brings the Mercedes team. Why have they gone down that route? Why have they decided that these two air intake points at the side of the car are no longer useful to them? It doesn't seem to have been too detrimental in their car. I believe that the performance we're seeing is the performance we would have seen with the car in Barcelona, but it is interesting and a little bit to get your head around when you see all of the other 18 cars on grid with these side pods and the Mercedes lacking them. What is interesting to say is that nobody else has tried to copy that yet, so I'm not sure what performance gains it has, if any, but I don't think they're as strong as Mercedes was maybe hoping they would be. At the moment, it does seem to be coming down to a Leclerc-Verstappen battle for the title this year. I think if Perez and Sainz want to get involved, they need to be more in the fight. Very clear during the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix that Verstappen and Leclerc were kind of ahead of everybody else, with Sainz and Perez bringing up the rear. Now, this is great for the teams of the Constructors' Championship, specifically Ferrari at the moment, who have had both their drivers on both podiums. But if these second drivers don't want to be seen as second drivers, they will need to start putting their feet in to get those points and get those wins that their teammates seem to be doing. We are early doors, but with what is looking to be a very tight championship like we had last season, I don't think it's going to take long. I mean, Red Bull is a done deal. I think everybody knows that Red Bull has their number one driver and Perez is there to play support. But in Ferrari, this is the first time since 2017 the team has been competitive. So if Sainz wants to not be treated as a second driver, he's going to have to start showing the performance soon, because Ferrari will quickly pull the rug and say, look, Leclerc is ahead, you're going to have to play support. Nico Hülkenberg subbed in for Sebastian Vettel for both of the opening races, as Vettel sadly tested positive continued to positively test for COVID. Because of the timing he caught COVID, he was still testing positive too close to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix and had to sit out of that one as well. It wasn't the most shining performance from Hülkenberg, not the shining performances we've seen in the past, whether that be because these cars are extremely different to what they were last year, the year before, and he got in with zero testing and is obviously still learning the car. That's probably a contributing factor. The other thing is, I don't think the Aston Martin is extremely competitive this year, with even Stroll kind of hanging around just outside of the points. Although Hülkenberg did manage to outperform Stroll at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. It's been another strong start to the season for Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri. He knows that car very well. He knows that team very well. Yuki Tsunoda's doing okay at the start of the season. The team probably wanted him to be doing a little bit more than he is. And obviously he had the DNF at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which was not helpful, but if these teams want to be in the fight for 5th, or possibly 4th, if McLaren can't get their act together soon, both drivers really need to be consistently scoring in the points. So I think there's going to be a little bit of conversation. Obviously, last season, Tsunoda started well, had his dip in the middle, and then started to come back towards the end of the season, which was possibly enough to save his seat. But whether that continues this year, I think if Tsunoda continues to show the kind of mid-season performance he had last year, this year, he won't be holding onto that seat by the end of the year. The Red Bull Junior program is fairly ruthless, and if they do have a young driver waiting in the wings, they will happily trade him in over Tsunoda. One team that is looking favourite for the best of the rest drive is the Alpine F1 team. They're seeming strong, the Renault package seems good, and the aero way they've gone with their car is also seeming very strong. They've had both drivers fighting for contention in Q3 and for points in both races. It was such a shame for Fernando Alonso at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, who was having a fantastic race, but unfortunately DNF'd at the same time as Daniel Ricciardo. I think Alpine's definitely one to watch. They'll be a consistent in the midfield, I believe, and that could be what gives them the edge to take 5th, maybe 4th at the end of the season. Williams has been struggling just a little bit again at the start of the season, obviously with the lacking performance in the Mercedes package that has hurt them, but again, I think the resurgence of Haas has really hurt them because they have now fallen back to the bottom of the grid. We do just need to talk a little bit about the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix in terms of the crash in qualifying and in terms of the incidents on Friday before the race even started. I'm not alone when I say I don't think this is a safe circuit to attend. I've never liked the circuit. There is a reason you do not do 200 mph around Monaco. There is a reason we don't have a ridiculously fast street circuit, and that is because it leads to incidents such as Schumacher's crash in qualifying. And with such a little room for error on a street circuit, as by definition of it being a street circuit, they just shouldn't be going that fast around it. Now, please correct me in the coffee pot down below if I'm wrong, but I believe the circuit for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix changes next year. They're supposed to be moving to a different circuit that isn't the Jeddah Street Circuit. I think it's in Ad Diriyah. But again, please correct me if I'm wrong because I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm grateful that they're not going back to it if that is the case. I don't want them to go back to it. I don't want anyone to race on it again. I think it was ridiculously unsafe. And then obviously we have the incidents on the Friday that put into contention why we're even going racing in a country like this in the first place. Obviously the attack on the power plant happened because it was a Grand Prix weekend, right? It was done because there was eyes on that part of the world. There was eyes on that city. And the people who did the attack wanted to make the television, wanted to make a headline, which they successfully did and almost successfully saw the closing of the Grand Prix. Something I would very, very much not have expected to happen, only because if you think back to the Australian Grand Prix in 2020, when we had an extremely good reason to boycott that race, or not race at that race, and how long that took to make that decision. And it was kind of a, well, the FIA aren't going to make the decision because then we have to reimburse the money, and the Australian promoters don't want to make the decision because then they have to reimburse the money. So I wasn't surprised to find that the drivers and the team principals were all probably told, look, this race goes ahead. If you don't want to race in it, fine, but you won't score points and you won't get your race fees back because we are going racing. You have to remember this sport, money talks most. It doesn't really matter about anything else. Money will always speak more, speak higher, which is why you lose good races and gain bad races on the calendar. It's something that isn't going to change in Formula One anytime soon because it is at its heart a business, as all sport is. I'll be very surprised if we don't go back to Saudi Arabia for racing. I don't agree with it. I certainly don't think we should go back to Jeddah because I think it's a very dangerous circuit. And okay, it had an exciting race at the end, but I still think we'd have got an exciting race on any other circuit. The exciting race was because the cars could follow closer and we have two very evenly matched cars. One with an advantage on straight line and aero and one with an advantage on power. So I don't think it's contributing from the track that we had a good race. I think it's contributing from the teams, the drivers, and the new regulations of the sport. And I only hope that I'm right in thinking we don't return there because I really don't want to. We've got the Australian Grand Prix coming up next, which is exciting. It's first time on the calendar since 2019 because, as I said earlier, it was obviously didn't run in 2020. They have a new layout, which is supposedly going to be 5 seconds faster than the old layout. But basically, a lot of the chicanes have either been removed or smoothened out, so it's just a lot less heavy braking zones and more power through corners. Basically, that's the difference we've got. In terms of the way it looks pretty similar to what it looked before, but it's obviously just a little bit more smoother and less hard corners or less 90-degree turns, basically, which means less heavy braking. I'm excited to see the differences. I'm excited to see how that might affect the racing. This is also going to be a good indicator of whether the new regulations translate over lots of different circuits, because this circuit is different from the ones we've been racing at before. We've also got a different climate, which will be good. A nice early start for anyone who's watching it and watching practice, so that's good too. It's really weird to have an Australian Grand Prix for me that isn't the start of the season, because since I've been watching properly, it's always been the start of the season, so that'll be fun too. I don't think the Australian fans are going to get a home win. I'll be very surprised if McLaren have managed to fix their problems by then. I think what we'll see over the season is McLaren slowly make its way back up the field, and also we should have the return of Sebastian Vettel as well this weekend, who definitely now should be clear of COVID. But that's everything from the double desert racing. That is everything as our build up to the Australian Grand Prix. I don't think there's any other breaking news that I've forgotten, but if there is, please let's go and talk about it down in the comment box below, and I will see you down there. Let me know your thoughts, feelings, opinions of the races just gone and the races to come, the season as a whole, the competitive order, you know, all this good stuff. I'll see you downstairs in a minute. But for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button some good old-fashioned love. And if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video! Can you tell I'm sick?